The sun was dying over the western plains, bleeding red across the horizon like an open wound. The wind carried the dry scent of dust and despair as Elias Crowe rode slowly toward the land that once bore his family's name, Crowe Ranch, 500 acres of forgotten promise. His father had built it with sweat and hope. Elias had left it behind in anger and loss. But death has a way of calling a man home. The letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier, sealed with a county clerk's stamp. You are the sole inheritor of Crowe Ranch. His father was gone, and what remained, if anything, waited for him at the edge of the desert. Elias didn't know whether to feel grief or guilt. He just rode, with a single horse and a heart hollowed by years of wandering. As he crested the final ridge, the ranch appeared below, broken fences like bones jutting from the earth, the barn half collapsed, and the house a silhouette of rot and memory. Ravens perched on the roof beams, black against the dying sun. No smoke rose from the chimney. No dogs barked. Only silence. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against the parched dirt. Every step felt like trespassing into a graveyard. The front door hung open, its hinges groaning in the wind. Inside, the air was stale, thick with mold and dust. His father's chair still sat by the hearth, tilted forward as if waiting. A single glass sat on the table, dry but stained, the ghost of a man's last drink. Elias brushed a hand across the mantel, finding a faded photograph beneath the dust. His father, younger, standing beside a group of ranch hands. The year was carved on the frame, 1871. He traced the image of the man he'd once called Pa, remembering the fights, the harsh words, the day he'd ridden away vowing never to return. But life out west had a way of teaching a man humility. The whiskey bottle he carried clinked softly as he set it down. Outside, a storm was brewing. Dark clouds rolled in from the mountains, and the air grew heavy with thunder. He stabled his horse and went to secure the barn doors. The old structure groaned in protest. As lightning flashed, something caught his eye, deep within the shadows of the hayloft, a shape, or several. He froze. The wind howled through the cracks as he climbed the ladder, heart hammering against his ribs. The smell hit first, something foul, metallic, and wrong. Then the flash of lightning again, searing the image into his mind. Bodies. 8 of them. Young girls, suspended by frayed rope, their small forms swaying gently in the draft. Apache, by the look of their dark braids and hand-woven dresses. Eyes closed, faces pale, as if sleep had taken them mid-prayer. Elias stumbled back, nearly falling. His breath came in broken gasps. The sight was too cruel, too sudden, like some nightmare carved into the rafters. He tore one of the ropes down, feeling the coarse hemp burn his palms. The body was cold, long cold. Whoever did this was long gone. He staggered outside into the wind, rain beginning to spit from the clouds. God Almighty, he whispered. What happened here? The storm broke open above him, drenching the land in a sudden torrent. The barn doors slammed shut in the wind. Elias dropped to his knees in the mud, the rain mixing with tears he hadn't meant to shed. This was no inheritance. This was a curse. As lightning lit the sky again, he saw something move at the far edge of the property, a shadow on horseback, watching. Then, just as quick, it vanished into the storm. Elias rose slowly, every instinct screaming that he wasn't alone on this land. The past wasn't dead. It was waiting. Rain fell through the night like a curse that refused to end. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch drowned in silence and mist. The land smelled of wet earth and sorrow. Elias Crowe hadn't slept. He'd sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon where he'd seen that rider vanish. Every hour, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying faint echoes, or perhaps memories. The barn loomed in the distance, its doors half open, revealing nothing but darkness. He wanted to ride to town, tell the sheriff, bring the world's order to this madness. But something deep in his gut stopped him. This didn't feel like a crime that could be buried in a report. It felt older, meaner, like the land itself had turned against him. He buried the 8 Apache girls at sunrise. Couldn't bring himself to dig 8 graves. The ground was too hard and his spirit too weak. Instead, he dug one long trench beneath an oak tree that still had life in it, and laid them side by side. He said no prayers. He didn't know the words that would fit such a sin. When he stood again, the morning light caught something at the edge of his vision, small carvings in the oak bark. Symbols. Circles crossed with arrows. He'd seen such marks once, years ago during the wars with the Apache bands. They meant warning. This land holds the dead. He felt a shiver crawl down his spine. Inside the house, he searched for answers. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps behind him. In his father's old desk, he found a locked drawer. The key was long gone, so he forced it open with his knife. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with horsehair and a half-burned ledger. The letters were written in his father's hand, but not to a friend or family, to a Colonel Samuel Pike, stationed once at Fort Summer. The tone was uneasy. Confessions tangled in fear. They wanted me to clear the land. Said they'd pay in gold. I didn't ask who it belonged to. I only followed orders. But the screams, Samuel, they follow me in my sleep. The Apache don't forgive, nor should they. Elias read on, breath catching as the truth unfolded. His father had taken part in the displacement of an Apache camp, women and children driven from their land. Some killed. Some taken. Those 8 girls, they weren't strangers. They were vengeance returned. He dropped the letters, heart pounding. The sins of the father had come home to roost, and now his son stood on cursed soil. A faint sound came from outside, the creak of leather, the shuffle of boots. Elias grabbed his rifle, moved to the window, and froze. A figure stood near the oak where the girls lay buried, tall, wrapped in a dark blanket, hair black as the raven's wing. His face was painted in ash and ochre, eyes unreadable. He held a single feather in his hand and placed it atop the graves. Elias stepped outside slowly, rifle still ready. "Who are you?" he called out, voice low but firm. The man didn't move. The wind stirred his blanket. Then, in a voice deep and calm as distant thunder, he said, "You walk on blood that ain't yours, Crowe." Elias stiffened. "You know my name?" "I knew the man before you," the stranger said. "And I know what he did." The air between them was heavy, 2 men divided by ghosts and guilt. Elias lowered his rifle, if only slightly. "If you came to settle his debt, you'll find no gold here." The stranger's gaze didn't waver. "Not gold. Balance." He turned and began to walk away, disappearing toward the canyon trail. But as he did, he said one final thing over his shoulder, words that clung to Elias's mind long after the man vanished into the fog. "The dead don't rest easy on stolen ground." The wind howled again across the empty plains, and for the first time, Elias wondered if redemption was even possible on land watered by blood. That night, the plains were restless again. Coyotes cried in the distance, and the moon rose like a cold silver coin above the horizon. Elias couldn't shake the words the stranger had spoken. The dead don't rest easy on stolen ground. They echoed in his skull with every gust of wind that rattled the house. He lit the last of the kerosene lamps and spread his father's letters across the table. The paper was old and brittle, the ink faded but legible enough to trace the past. The names, the locations, the signatures, all connected. His father had worked with Colonel Pike to drive out Apache families under the pretense of protecting settlers. In truth, it had been theft and vengeance disguised as law. Outside, the coyotes' cries turned to something deeper. Drums. Faint, rhythmic, rolling across the distance like thunder. Elias froze, head tilted. Drums. In the middle of the night. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. The plains stretched silent under the moon, but the sound came again, closer this time. Not drums. Hooves. He moved toward the barn, boots crunching softly in the dirt. The air was thick and still, and the shadows looked darker than they should. Then, movement. The horse that had carried the stranger earlier stood tethered near the tree line, steam rising from its flanks. And beside it, emerging from the dark, was the man himself. "You came back," Elias said quietly. The stranger stepped into the moonlight. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes burned with something ancient. "You stayed," he said simply. "I buried the girls." "I know." The stranger nodded once. "That was right." Elias hesitated. "You knew them." The man looked toward the graves beneath the oak. "One was my sister. The rest, her friends. They were taken during the spring raids, never seen again. Till now." The truth hit Elias like a blow. His stomach turned. "I didn't." The stranger raised a hand, stopping him. "You didn't. But your blood did." They stood in silence, the wind whispering through the grass. Finally, Elias spoke. "What's your name?" The stranger's gaze didn't leave the graves. "Taza." "Taza," Elias repeated, the word tasting foreign and heavy. "You came for vengeance?" Taza looked up then, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "I came for answers." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until he stood a few feet away. Elias felt no threat in him, only weight, sorrow, and a quiet kind of strength. Taza said, "Your father helped men burn villages for land that never belonged to him. They thought the wind would carry away what they'd done. But the land remembers. It always remembers." Elias swallowed hard. "Then what do you want from me?" "To see if you're different." The night held its breath. Hours later, they sat by a small fire behind the barn, two men bound by ghosts. Elias poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to Taza, who accepted it without a word. The flames flickered between them, painting their faces in shifting light. "I spent half my life running from my father," Elias said quietly. "Didn't think I could hate him more than I already did. But this," he stared into the fire, "this makes me wish I'd never come back." Taza's voice was calm but sharp. "Running doesn't change what's under your boots." Elias looked up. "Then what does?" The Apache warrior stared into the flames. "Making it right." Silence. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke, not from their fire, but something larger, sharper. Elias turned toward the horizon. A glow. Taza stood immediately, eyes narrowing. "Smoke from the north ridge." Elias grabbed his rifle and ran for his horse. "There's nothing up there but the old cabin and—" Then he stopped cold. He remembered, that ridge had been where his father stored old weapons and crates from the war. Taza swung onto his horse. "Who else knows this land?" "Men from town," Elias said. "Old Pike's men. They used to work the boundaries. Claim jumpers now." Taza's face hardened. "Then they come to finish what they started." The two rode hard toward the ridge, the cold wind cutting against their faces. The fire grew brighter with every mile. When they reached the rise, the world ahead was glowing orange, the old cabin engulfed in flames. 3 horses were tethered nearby, and shadows moved in front of the fire. Elias dismounted quietly, crouching behind a boulder. "That's Pike's mark," he whispered, pointing at the wagon beside the fire. "He's here." Taza nodded once. "Then tonight, the land will speak." The flames roared higher, throwing wild light across their faces. For the first time, Elias felt something he hadn't in years: purpose. Not for himself, but for the dead beneath the oak. He chambered around. Taza drew his knife, and together they stepped out of the shadows. The fire burned like judgment itself, painting the ridge in red and gold. Sparks flew into the night, swallowed by the wind. 3 men stood near the flames, rough, scarred faces lit by whiskey and greed. Their laughter cracked through the dark like gunfire. Elias and Taza moved closer, boots silent in the ash. From behind a fallen log, Elias could see their weapons propped carelessly near the wagon. Pike was there, older now, gray at the temples, his uniform long replaced by a fur coat. But the arrogance, the cold smile, that hadn't aged a day. Pike poured a drink from a silver flask, glancing toward the burning cabin. "Ain't no ghosts here, boys," he said, voice rasping with smoke. "Crow's fool son can keep his land if he wants. It's cursed ground anyway." Taza's hand tightened around the knife hilt. Elias felt his chest twist with anger, guilt, and something deeper, resolve. "Let me end it," Taza whispered. Elias shook his head. "No, not like this." "Then how?" Elias didn't answer. He stepped out from behind the log, rifle raised, his silhouette framed by the fire. "Evening, Pike." The men spun, startled. Hands went for guns. "Crow," Pike said, smirking. "Well, I'll be damned. The prodigal son returns to his graveyard." "You killed those girls," Elias said. His voice was steady now, carved from something harder than fear. "You hanged them to scare my father, to make him give up the land." Pike laughed, low and cruel. "Boy, your daddy begged us to help him. Claimed the Apaches were coming for revenge. Said he wanted them gone. We just obliged. That land's been red since the day he bought it." Elias felt his stomach drop. His father's guilt, his silence, it all made sense now. The deal, the blood, the revenge. Taza stepped from the shadows behind him, silent as the wind. The men froze. Pike's smirk faltered when he saw the war paint. "Apache," he spat. "Thought you people learned your lesson." Taza's voice was low. "We learn what must be remembered." The air snapped. One of Pike's men drew, but Taza moved first, a flash of steel in the firelight. The man fell without a sound. Another reached for his rifle. Elias fired. The crack split the night, and the man dropped. Only Pike remained. He stumbled back, grabbing for his pistol, but Elias was faster. The shot tore through the air, striking the old colonel's hand. The gun flew from his grip, clattering into the dirt. He fell to his knees, clutching the wound, eyes wide. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "You think killing me fixes what's been done?" Elias lowered the rifle. "No, but maybe it stops what's still happening." For a long moment, no one moved. The fire hissed, embers floating upward like restless spirits. Then Taza stepped forward, his voice calm. "Let the land judge him." He tossed Pike's gun into the flames. The old man screamed as the firelight danced across his face, part terror, part madness. Then he scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the darkness beyond the ridge. Elias watched until the sound of his boots vanished. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, final. The wind shifted, blowing smoke toward them. The fire was dying down. The cabin collapsed inward with a groan, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Elias turned to Taza. "What happens now?" Taza looked toward the horizon, where dawn's first light began to bleed through the clouds. "Now," he said softly, "you listen." They rode back to the ranch in silence. When they reached the oak tree, the air was still. The graves lay undisturbed, the morning sun warming the soil. Taza dismounted, placing his hand over the earth. "They're at rest now," he said. "But the land won't forget. Neither should you." Elias nodded slowly. "I won't." He looked toward the ranch house, broken, charred, but standing. For the first time, he didn't see ruin. He saw a chance, not to rebuild what was lost, but to make something right from what remained. Taza mounted his horse, turning toward the hills. "I'll ride north," he said. "There's peace for me there." Elias stepped forward. "Taza, thank you." The warrior didn't look back. "You buried the dead. That's thanks enough." Then he rode away, a lone figure disappearing into the light. Elias stood beneath the oak tree, hat in hand, wind in his hair. He whispered to the graves, "Maybe now we can rest." As the sun rose higher, its rays touched the land like forgiveness, soft, uncertain, but real. The storm had passed. He turned toward the house, shoulders squared, and began to walk. And as the screen fades to dusk over the silent ranch, the narrator's voice returns, calm, reflective, carrying the weight of the frontier. The West was never just land and dust. It was memory, blood, guilt, and the hard fight for redemption. Some men inherit gold, others inherit ghosts. Elias Crowe inherited both, and found peace buried beneath the soil. If you felt his journey, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more tales from the untamed frontier, where every mile holds a memory and every man must face his past.